Let every day be Christmas. Christmas is forever, not just for one day. For loving, sharing, giving are not to put away.
Show you guys in my tree.
Like bells and lights and tinsel in some box upon a shelf. The good you do for others is good you do yourself. Times are quite different and you may not be near, but you're consciously connected to those you hold dear. So spread the love and share in the cheer. In December, sign 3 up to Gravity and enjoy rewards all year.
Okay, I guess we're live. So it's been a while since we've done a Bitstocks podcast. It's been a while since I've had the pleasure of just sitting down and just having good conversations with interesting people. And you, sir, are someone who no one is even really aware of who you truly are, but you have definitely an exposure and a following in this space, and you're working on something that is very interesting and has carried quite a mystique. And I've been prodded about Project Anne quite a lot through Twitter over the last year or so. That is something that I do really need to look into. So we have here today with the Bitstocks Podcast none other than Mr. Scatman, otherwise AKA, and announced for the first time, Lukas, right?
That's right. Yep.
Lukas, pleasure having you here on the Bitstocks Podcast. Thank you for joining us. So I guess I'm gonna just hit you straight in the gut straight away. Why the anonymity? Like, why are you coming out and revealing yourself now?
Well, I first came into Bitcoin. I was a late comer. I was deep in the trenches working on what now is Anne before I even knew about Bitcoin. So I come from the artificial general intelligence space. I was working for a startup for a long while there. And I took an exit from that space. It became uncomfortable when certain agencies were getting involved, and it wasn't what I was interested in going forward with. So I kind of made a smooth exit from that space, laid low, worked on what is now Anne before I even knew the name Satoshi Nakamoto or even heard of Bitcoin. I just was too busy to pay attention, I guess. I found out about Bitcoin in 2017 when everything was blowing up. That's when I saw Blockstream and BTC and immediately recognized the pattern that was in play and thought, you know what? I heard about BCH was coming and they were going to hold true to the original protocol. And that gave me something worth fighting for. So I took a break from what I was developing and what I'd been on a long journey. And for about 20 months in Bitcoin, I just was making memes and videos and getting used to the terrain and exploring, having a good time and attacking the lies and all the drama. And so that's how I got started. So I was really mostly involved at it from a meme video. And that's actually most folks, that's all they thought I did. They thought I did that for a living.
The meme artist.
But I didn't. I just picked it up, and it's just they're about patterns of truth. They have this idea of meme magic. You can make a good meme. You can get people to laugh. You can have really good production quality. But to have like this meme magic, it has to capture a truth, this compact truth that just unfolds in ways that you can't necessarily design for. You could try, but
meme and the subject of artificial intelligence goes together very well. And not many people are aware of this, but it's a great way of communicating information if you do want to prevent it being read by a lot of the algorithms that are out there. It's actually promoted if you want. That's why, obviously, I don't want to jump straight into it. I'm sure we might touch on things like this with our conversation. But the QAnon movement use it a lot as a means of get information out there and communication.
Mhm.
However, in what that you were just saying, you touched on artificial intelligence, but specifically, you said general artificial intelligence.
That's right.
So already I know that, okay, we're going to have a good conversation. All right.
Okay.
And I'm definitely going to enjoy this conversation. So break down for me your understanding on what that term means, and for the audience, what that term means. And yeah, like how did you get into that subject? So way before we talk about Bitcoin, what led you on to not machine learning AI, the subject of general AI?
Yeah, so I was not interested in AI, at least what I had seen about AI, the rule sets, trying to attack a single narrow problem. Typically, what I had seen is that you get something created in the image of the developer, and so it's very limited. We're all limited, and what attracted me to AGI was that it had the potential. It still can fall into the same traps, but there is the potential there to create something that can be greater, or that is not limited by what you see or what your awareness level is. Because as a developer, we're limited by whatever our awareness level is. Even if you are the wisest man on the planet, if you are going to design something in your image, it's still bound and limited. And the architecture that was most attractive to me was the human brain, because we don't go to the doctor to get a new brain module if we want to learn a new language.
Not quite yet. I mean, Neuralink, Elon Musk.
Yeah,
just not quite yet.
I could go off on that thing too, but it's got 1024. Anyways, it's very limited, Neuralink, but I imagine they're going to keep expanding that. But AGI is interesting to me because it doesn't have the limits and the bounds. And, Craig Wright talks a lot about AI, and he's referring to the AI I have zero interest in when he talks about its limitations, its rules sets, it's following this structured order program sort of thing. That to me, I have zero interest in that. But with the AND platform, that AI can be done with very relative ease by anybody who wants to take it on, because what I've discovered or found to be true, so it's just a rediscovery or just eye opening. It's all about the core base level of storage, and that sets you up for future benefit or future potential, or it completely stops you from the potential before the project starts. And so these AI projects that design the chess program or design a specific task, even though there are interesting new chess programs that I'm tracking that do it a little bit different way, these rule-based systems, the way you actually store the rules and just the core interaction of the AI system itself, it's flawed to start, flawed from the perspective of limited. Now, that can be great for a particular use case. If somebody just wants it to do one tiny thing, it could do that one tiny thing great. It can perform, it can do what it was designed to do. That's not what I was interested in. So when I got involved in AGI, it was, looking at specifically not AI.
So where did the love for even getting into the subject matter start off with? Because you mentioned fascination with the human brain, right? And
that's right.
When you're looking at networks, and most definitely when I look at Bitcoin, it's inspiration for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
But before Bitcoin and just the subject matter period, and then going into wherever it was that you was working, you mentioned these other outside influences coming in and muddying the water, which I could definitely imagine exactly what that would have been like, right? And where those agendas and incentives were steering things. But if we just talk about the purity, the educational aspect, the learning, the inspiration, like where did that stuff come from?
Well, it may sound odd, but there's a strong human element that ties to my interest in AGI, because it takes it out of the hard structured cold metal AI world and it puts it into this human connection. There's no reason why a machine should not be, a software should not be capable of understanding humor, of understanding idiomatic terms. This would touch on what you had said earlier. You can have safety in putting things in memes. A true AGI should not have a problem doing that. And that's where some of this early work that I had done, I actually still have patents published to this day that touch on that for a private company. And some of the outside influences were government influences that I didn't want to get down that track, get put in a basement working.
Obviously, there's a huge stigma around AI, most certainly general AI. There are some of most notable business leaders and thought leaders out there, Elon Musk. In fact, Elon Musk and Jack Ma, which I hold Musk in a completely different intellectual regard, but both of them, when they discuss artificial intelligence, I don't know if you've seen this talk, they were on stage and there was a conversational debate with Elon Musk and Jack Ma on the subject of artificial intelligence, and it was terrible at best, right? But I reckon so because I know definitely in this case of Elon, how hyper censored he is when he discusses and speaks on certain things, right? But what has come through quite frequently with Elon is the fear aspect. And I think a lot of his concerns are very just and justified with what he knows is going on in Silicon Valley and where this concept can lead should they crack it. And I just want to really bring that aspect into the conversation for the audience before we talk about, okay, why Bitcoin? Because that's definitely an engineering choice and a purification choice. But before we get there, I definitely want to discuss it. What are the issues that you saw working in this area, this field, that then had you looking elsewhere? So the flaws in the system and whether those flaws are a technical basis, which I definitely think there are a few from a technical standpoint, but also how that then ties into ethics. And then I guess we start priming, then leading into Bitcoin and more specifically what it is that you're doing.
Well, I mean, so just to be clear, I was in this AGI space from about 2006 to 2010. That's when I was proper involved in this startup before I left. And the ethics question is a big question because there's many ways you can take this. And there's many applications that you can apply things to that are not ethical, and so this depends. Are we talking about this entity that sits on its own and has potential to?
Not so much that. I think from my understanding, is the limitation with being able to create something that remotely simulates intelligence, right? General intelligence is a data harvesting problem, right? Okay. Feeding it enough data in order to start getting the results that you would expect to see from your true intent of what it is that you're building. And I think this has created this very insidious and cancerous data web around the world that has us being caught like flies in the trap of Googles, the Facebooks, the Twitters, who are then sticking these IV drips into us and harvesting our data. And for now, creating a huge business of ad revenue and that capital coming in and supporting this, and that's how they're making their billions. But there's something even more insidious going on behind the scenes because you've got a continuous and reliable, very dense data stream coming in, feeding, training.
So they're not going to get to AGI with the path they're on. They're going to get to something entirely different. And it is very scary for some of the reasons you've talked about. But, and to be clear, I just want to make this very clear. Anne is not an AGI, but AGI could be built on top of Anne because of core things that are addressed at the very basic level that do not prevent these things from happening. we can, if we touch on that a little more later, we can. But one of the interesting things with AGI is when we look at ourselves and we want to look at intelligence in general, it's a big term, a lot of different directions we can go. But there's a couple of key things we can kind of hang our hat on. And when you look at like in AI, there's the Chinese thought room experiment. It's often referenced about inside this room, it has the ability to translate Chinese characters. You feed in script and it feeds out an answer. And you don't really know if that's a person inside who understands Chinese or if it's this script. It kind of it revolves around that concept. But this touches on something very, very, very key, which is the idea of concepts, that concepts are not the same as symbols or words. So we use symbols and words and they map to concepts, and then we store the concepts in our brain. And this is often times where we have conversation where we think we're talking about the same thing because we use the same word. We do it on Twitter all the time, but somebody else has a completely different definition of that word, and we're not even in the same ballpark. And we spend all this time traveling down, arguing about things we weren't even on the same page with the term. So a lot of the AIs that came out were focused strongly on words, like word mining, word labeling. They gather all that data you're talking about, and then they have to come in afterwards, and then they kind of tag it. And they have entire companies now that focus on data labeling to make this jumbled mess of data usable, so that their machine algorithms can begin to use it, because it's coming in from all these sources. And they got to make it structured in some way. So the need there is they need to turn the words into concepts, because otherwise they're just at the symbol level. They're not yet mapping to the thing that they want to talk about. So what is key and crucial when we look at our own mind and how we store information, we encode information as it comes in. So nothing gets stored in your brain unless it's wired up to something else in your brain. And it kind of creates this chicken and egg scenario that in order to get in, it has to find something to tie to, because the information is not encoded in the neurons. It's encoded in the relationships between the neurons. And so this is a key, this is kind of a key tenet that I've kind of held on to with designing forward and building, and is that the information is not stored in the nodes. It's stored in the connections, and that's how it's so rapidly accessible in the brain model, because there's nothing to crack open and look into the node and say, hey, is what I'm looking for inside of there? It's all wired in together in this big hypergraph.
That's a very eloquent way of describing what you just described. I've used a not too dissimilar concept around explaining consciousness. Funny enough, It's like people assume consciousness is something that is a product and emanation of the brain. Your body is a tuner, and you are tuning in consciousness, and there's only one source, universal, and you have your own perception. However, for the point and the example that I've used is, it's like enjoying Beyonce on the radio, right? And if you crack open that radio, do I expect to see Beyonce? Right? Well, no, right? And that seems like a silly idea and a silly concept, but ultimately that's what it is that you're speaking on there. So that's a very different and interesting way of looking at any form of system. And that is actually very nature inspired, which I've always said the best innovations. And you also mentioned another word, rediscovery.
Yeah, to be clear, yes. And I'm only a partial fraction rediscovery, just to be, very, very clear, limited view of what's already out there.
All right, so let's dig in a deeper detail then. So what is AN? First, what does AN stand for? And why is this different? Why is this going to lead us into a different direction? And the whole thinking behind it.
Sure. So AN is, the A in AN is not artificial. It stands for awareness. And the NN is neural net, and then the E is explorer. So we have an awareness neural net explorer. And the neural net part is not a bad word. in my model, but artificial is. To me, artificial is like a derogative term from where I'm coming from. So Anne is the awareness neural net explorer. And the idea is if we can interconnect our data proper without the jumbled pile of mess and going in the way that Google's harvesting us with those drips. But if we can actually store the data the way our brain stores it encoded at the storage step to get it into the graph, it's already sitting there on a silver platter, but by our choice, because this is data we've chosen to provide, and it's ready to be usable at scale in a giant hypergraph. And so this is where we can start to talk about awareness and what awareness is in terms of Anne, and how that can actually touch on what it is for us ourselves. Because ultimately, technology has failed me personally. So I was the techie kid with all the gadgets and all that. I don't even use a phone now. I literally am building this. I don't even carry a smartphone. I'm only on the internet when I'm working in this desk that I'm talking to you in now, because it's so impersonal and everyone has so many connection friends, but they're not connecting. And there's so much, I think people have an essence of this, people are trying to address it. I know George online has a lot to say sort of from this aspect, George in the BSV community, Samuels, about the interpersonal relationships. So how can we use a computer and software, but not push us further down the wrong path and actually go down the path that leads us to actually interacting more? And Anne has the potential at first, the first pass, which to me would be a very big win. It's not to explain why and get into these deeper next way downstream things like intention and intent, but just to show what. Because in this world with all these, the big diametrically opposed views and all the stuff going on, we can't even discuss what. Like we're arguing that the rock fell and hit the ground. If we can establish what, and we can store the what in a way that's clear and on this ledger and usable, then we can get to the next step. So at first it can be a basic mirror. And I found this one thing to be true. No matter how insightful or wise of a person that you may meet, there's still going to be loads and loads of people that reject anything they have to say, won't even listen to it. However, if we had a machine, if I had a little personal program that you could log into that would give you a nice little prompting or reminder and say, hey, we noticed that you rated so-and-so with a negative emotion, a fearful emotion, but you also had this to say about, topic, this other related topic. If the machine could point these basic what facts out to you and present them to you, to present contradictions in your positions,
it's a tool to help you become a better you.
That's right. It would help. I know many of the folks I run into would be a lot more open to listening when their egos aren't on the line, when it's not like this heated conflict of your view versus my view, and all of a sudden it's more like, hey, this is a self builder. This is where part of the awareness comes into play with.
That's a very interesting distinction. And firstly, as well, I think what you just said, I would imagine and hope that people watching this and who are interested in the project, any concerns that they have around where we're going as a global collective and what is Bitcoin's role in this artificial intelligence driven world will hopefully be put at ease, because you would expect someone such as yourself who's working on a project as advanced as this, which is really cutting edge and just where we're going. We're leading into the fourth industrial revolution, automation and all the rest of it, right? But you just said that you don't have a phone. You clearly respect and embrace human connection. Your solution is to bring about not just human connection, but a deeper connection with yourself. You also use the term mirror, right? That's very interesting. And it's very rare as well. And I'm really glad that we're having a conversation, because I try to come from a very similar place. I really do believe nature is the inspiration. And if you want amazing technical advancement, then you should study, embrace, respect nature. And I do think we've gone off the path of where we look at technology as a liberator of man. Ironically, it's become a captive, right? It's become a captivator. And we can flip the script. And it's important that we do make these very conscious distinctions and also lead by action, an example that, look, that we can work on all this crazy stuff and bring in all this automation and all these tools of humanity, which are automated, but these are there to embrace, ironically, your humanity. So where's Bitcoin fit into this? Why is Bitcoin important? And is it an important factor to reinforce these principles?
Yeah, so I've said a little bit on Twitter about this, that AN is not a Bitcoin technology. So AN is a standalone project platform idea that was working in parallel to all the amazing things Bitcoin was going on, unbeknownst to me. And then I find out what Bitcoin is, and it's just a match made in heaven, because Bitcoin has two native indexes that are so important on the data side. And still to this day, not many projects are taking advantage of it. They're taking advantage of the UTXOs and then these things called text IDs in Bitcoin. But we have, which is a great index. In AN, those are the connections between the neurons. So like in the brain, when you're forming a connection, I can broadcast a transaction and I can connect two neurons. So the other important thing here is the neurons in the AND world, and in the Bitcoin world, that's a BSV address. Other in MetaNet, they call it a node. So there's a lot of terms thrown around here. But BSV in Bitcoin, I get a native address that's an addressable neuron. And so this is what's key in AN, that some of the other projects aren't necessarily, I don't feel, taking advantage of the BSV address space. But that's okay. Their projects are theirs, and AN is AN. So I'm not here to belittle anybody. I'm just saying AN takes full advantage of BSV addresses. I literally get an identifier for every neuron. And now I have a native way, because of Bitcoin, to not only transmit a connection to another neuron, but I also have a way to have an economic model embedded and married to data. So without Bitcoin, I had struggled finding a way to make this economically sound, just any of it.
Yeah.
But with Bitcoin, I can now marry data with Satoshis, and that still has to be done in a specific way. I had to find a way to be able to send a data transaction, because the op return data is a different type of transaction than if I just were to send you a wallet payment. And at first I was trying to send a data transaction, but I also needed to send some Satoshis for let's say I wanted to trigger a service. That's two transactions. Then I'd have to send a third to tie those two transactions together. So I had to solve that. Now I send one transaction. It has embedded data, that's an instruction, and it has the Satoshis involved. It's immensely powerful, and I can trigger backend services that are running on a server. Like if I want to validate an email on chain, this is not off chain, this is not on an email server, on chain email validation for the world to see. If I lose track of you, I can find your latest validated email address on the blockchain. I can do that, and I can trigger that service and give it instructions in a single transaction. And that's because of the power of BSV. Addresses are the neurons, and I'm connecting neurons. And when I connect them with a single transaction, and that transaction in AN, like in the brain, it follows a single schema, a single protocol at the top level. And this is a key point when we talk about protocols. There are protocols used to store data, and everybody creates a protocol to store, I want to store the car protocol and engine type, make, model, tires, all this sort of stuff. That protocol should not be a base level protocol. That should be a protocol that the master schema is capable of encoding, just like your brain is. So the protocol that Anne is addressing is at the level of the brain hardware, in the analogy of the brain, and in the simple analogy that neurons connect. And they connect in the same language because the brain can then operate on the whole network as a whole. That's how your neural nets work in your mind. When you see a charging lion, you can respond within milliseconds and not be dead. If we use different protocols at the hardware level in the brain, none of us would be here. Matter of fact, maybe some of us did have that, and that's why those ones aren't around. So this is a key point to point out with one schema. It starts with one schema. First, I need an environment that allows me to store information on a level playing field, encoded data that just simply connects to neurons connecting. And this is how I store anything in Anne. This is how anything is ever stored in Anne, is at that level first. So we have the high protocols and the low protocols. That's anybody's protocol can be stored in your brain. And that's the way it should be on this data protocol. I'll mention one last point on this while we're on it. We all fought so hard, some of you guys a lot longer than I did, because I came to the space in 2017, to have a stable Bitcoin protocol. It's so important. And everybody, I find it ironic, everybody understands how important it is to have one stable protocol. However, we get this stable protocol, and through our excitement and let's go build stuff, we go run out and we start storing our data with 1,000 protocols on the data side. And now we're essentially, we got the payment side solved with the stable protocol, but now where we're trying to innovate is in this data space. And now we're juggling 1,000, soon to be 10,000 different protocols for storing things. And it's unsustainable at scale. It shoots ourselves in the foot. We will not be able to get to the utility and this revolution of tomorrow by just duplicating the same data storage patterns that we had with the last phase.
Totally.
So,
and I completely agree with that view. Right. Question I want to throw in your direction as to how you see it, and also I want to start getting to the subject area of how a user is going to experience this, right? Mm-hmm. And what change it brings to a user. So, how do you see Bitcoin? Do you see Bitcoin as your hardware, your computer, and maybe running, say, base MS-DOS? And with what you're doing, you're bringing, say, Windows to the table that brings more of a sophisticated operating system environment. I mean, what's the relationship? Because this existed before Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
I understand the monetization and the data aspect as to what Bitcoin brings to the table. But if we look at Bitcoin as 3 core components, you've got permanent storage, the blockchain, right? So that's your hard drive. Mm-hmm. You've got random access memory being the mempool, right? So that's your RAM. And then you've got the processor, which I would say in Bitcoin is us, right? We do all the push functions. I hit an instruction on my application, it then sends an instruction to the network. It's all based on human consciousness, an input somewhere. Even if you do machine to machine, that was coded to do what it is that you've asked it to do, right? So that's, in a very basic way, how I would see and describe Bitcoin. And I'll be looking at, okay, well, if it's a computer, how are we going to put an operating system on this computer that then allows more sophisticated functionality, like contextualization, like what you're discussing, right? How do we apply context to the base protocol layer to allow it to have more functionality and operate in a more, I guess, sophisticated but yet simple and natural way? How do you see that relationship between what you're building and Bitcoin?
Yeah, so Bitcoin for and replaced the memory layer, the base storage memory layer for permanent storage. That's the chain source of truth. It's like in the brain model, long-term storage. So these things that are way back that you can draw upon that come in from various indexes, a little smell, and all of a sudden hey, I remember back when I was a kid, these kind of things. But for a project the size of Anne, and I would say many projects would realize this quickly if they haven't already. You have to store the information again. If you're going to give your users, and aside from a wallet, I'm not talking about SPV and these sort of things. I'm talking about like a data app. The chain is not an efficient web server as much as a lot of folks would love it to be. That's not to say it can't be. Maybe there's a hybrid technology in the future that's a super node built as a thing that can serve up data. I'm just saying in its present state, data needs to be stored in what people refer to as a second layer.
I agree.
So I have the long-term memory on the chain. It's the source of truth. We can go back to it and validate anything.
And also, it's like proofs in the pudding with mining, right? A lot of the data is pruned.
That's right. It can be pruned. That's exactly right. So, and there will be versions of the chain that aren't pruned, and those will be different services and these sort of things. But so the chain is this long-term memory, rock solid deal that I have. It's also the ability. It's also what you said. The transaction, the broadcast of information is almost like you and I interacting now. So Bitcoin covers that part of the analogy too. We're making transactions right now that are being stored in our brains. So in Bitcoin, I use it for the long term. I have a middle layer like many other projects do. Unwriter has done a fantastic job at providing a middle layer for anybody's data to be able to pull from his work, from the world he helped create, serve it up on a nice little silver platter for everyone to grab. I have that version of a layer for Anne, and it is essentially exactly what it looks like on the chain. It's just what I would call like middle memory in the brain. And then I have another version of a memory manager in every application that's an Anne app, whether it runs on your phone or on a browser. This is like a mini version of the brain that gets built in your app that's only applicable to your application. And what it does is it draws through the middle layer to pull information on demand, so that you don't always have to have the whole entire world in your hands in an edge device or on an application, but you have access to getting it when needed on demand. So that's how I would see the use of Bitcoin in replacing the Anne stack, as well as there's obviously the big payment feature. For me and Anne, that was the winning decider as far as, because I could build Anne. I actually have built a version of Anne. I still have products running in the healthcare space. It wasn't called Anne, and I was hired as a salaried employee at the time, and built little miniature versions of what Anne does for specific use cases in private companies. And obviously, I didn't use Bitcoin. There was no payment feature there. So
give me a couple of use cases. So average person off the street, how would they be using a system like Anne in a few years? I wouldn't say now it's more about developers and building apps and us getting more throughput on chain and all the rest of it. But in a few years, all things going swimmingly, how are we using this?
This is where it can potentially come off arrogantly, and it has sometimes on Twitter when I've rubbed across.
This is the first time you've come out, man. No one's even seen your face. This is the time to pump your chest.
No, I know. But what I'm about to say is this: any use case can benefit from using Anne, because Anne is not a product; it's a way. So this is just a way of storing data and encoding it at the storage step. That makes our life infinitely easier downstream, and it makes us all these promises that we've been given by different companies and platforms and technologies about how we can interconnect in the future. All the sci-fi movies we watch, we can do that. We can actually do that if we store our data the right way. If we store our data encoded at the storage step, wired together, in a big graph, we can get to this future that we talk about. If we don't, and we store it in willy-nilly protocols for each project that does a really good job at doing what you designed it to do, or he designed, or she designed.
But it's limited by your state of consciousness, and then it interferes and conflicts with someone else's state of consciousness, as opposed to like real consciousness, which is we all have our own intent. You can meditate in the morning, you can set your intent for the day, but I tell you what, as soon as you walk out of that door, you're interacting with every single other human being who's doing the exact same thing. So your outcome can be relatively deterministic depending on how strong your intent is, but you always have a variable because of your interacting all the time. Right? So are you saying that this system simulates something like that, where you have an organic involvement of interactions that aren't limited to the fact that I set my intent this morning to say complete a certain 3 tasks, but I could have got sidetracked, get a phone call from the kid's school, which means I can't complete 2 of those 3 tasks, right? You just don't know unless you know, but you still need to exist. You still need to get to the end of that day.
This is just popping up right now, so I'll say it to your users or to your listeners after this event. I welcome you to challenge the and design with any use case that has been troubling or not addressed, or has some hiccups or trouble, figuring out how in the heck are we going to do this, and let me know of it, and I will show you a technical design, whether you want to do it live or whether you want to give me whatever amount of time, showing you how and storing things in the and way can pull that off. And I'm confident that any curveball you throw me can be handled this way. I've been thinking along these terms since 2006, and I haven't found a single use case yet that would not benefit from storing it the way our brain stores it. And I say that loosely because I can't store it the way our brain store it. I don't have our brain. I don't have a hardware
That's
version
a
of our
bold
brain.
statement, solid statement.
But I welcome the challenge, and I'm not talking about a charge here. You throw it over the fence to me. EHR, supply chain, it doesn't matter. Throw whatever your heart. Throw voting in a way that you want it to be secure but visible. Whatever the requirements are, throw it my way. It's solvable. And
let's do this then. I'll have my team segment this section, right? And we'll post it out there, and we'll get the community to throw some ideas your way. And then maybe what we could do is you can arrange yourself. It would be a great way to promote the capabilities of Anne.
Sure.
If maybe just pick 1 or 2 of those and just run them and just do a live demonstration. We'll be happy to do that with you.
I'd be happy to do it. To be clear, I'm talking about designing a solution from an architecture standpoint. Like, how would you use and to solve it? I won't actually be building it in a day. The solution.
No, I can imagine.
Yeah. But I'm not too far off from having that ability to rapidly building these things, because once you have the brain, once you have the structure in place, and once you are using the structure in the way that I'm talking about using it, it's a whole different way of thinking, but it opens up immense possibilities. I'll give you an example real quickly. Let's think you were building a car app on the blockchain, and you had to create a car protocol to store your cars. So you're gonna think of all the attributes or properties of a car that were important to you to store on the blockchain, and you're going to create the car protocol. So you create the make and the model and the engine and the year. Let's just say it's a limited protocol. And so these are pieces of information you put in op return transactions, and you broadcast them to the chain. Before Bitcoin, you would have put these in a table. Maybe if you're using a table, you'd have the car table, and the columns would be year, make, model, and the rows would be all the cars that you were documenting, and you broadcast those to the chain. Here's the natural problem that I had addressed at the healthcare company that I mentioned, that I have some code still running. You want to change the protocol because you got a new attribute. This is a natural thing. Something comes up, you think, oh man, I want the muffler. I need to know what kind of muffler this thing has on it. And so you've got to change your protocol, and you've got to now add another variable to it. And all these areas down the line get affected. and it's months.
Every single Fast and Furious movie that comes out, you got to add a new standard.
That's what I'm saying. No, we need version 2. You know, we gotta rewrite the code, guys. You know, dominoes go down. But if you designed it in the way the brain was, you could change that with one transaction. You could change the structure of your protocol, because in AND, it's one protocol to define anything. You use AND to define your protocol, which means you can use AND to alter it. And all you would be doing was changing the definition of your protocol by adding a new parameter to say, hey, by the way, cars also supply muffler type in this universe I've created. And then on all your cars, you can add a muffler type to them as they come along. You haven't changed your protocol because it's just a way of storing things completely different. You're not trying to solve the world going into your project. And that's what typically is done. I've been on the consulting side in various industries with various companies, and it's always about them trying to solve the universe and get all the requirements, and they want to solve your problem because they've got to make hardened decisions at the data level that are not very easy to change if they change. So they go in, try to foresee everything, but they can't.
That's a challenge of ego for humanity, period. And we see it in the space. I mean, I don't think it's even worthwhile trying to even count how many cryptocurrency projects there are out there anymore, right?
Yeah.
And every single one of those has been under the guise of changing banking and changing the world and being pro humanity. And it's not. It's just a big, huge ego money grab. And if it is in the guise of genuinely wanting to change humanity, then they misunderstand the factors that will be required to have a true impact. Because ultimately, everyone's gone out there and created their own isolated universe.
That's right.
And that's why that's why there is absolutely all activity happening on the vast majority of these chains, because that's what will happen every single time. If you go off and try and create something in that way that is outside of connectivity and being effectively an evolving system based on more input and connectivity from people in one source, one place, or coexisting and evolving collectively, then you're gonna have your isolated BS universe with no interaction. Then the next conversation matters could be talking about how you connect all of your isolated universe to prevent you all from being so freaking lonely in the first place.
Yeah. And we're doing that more in this era than we had in previous eras in our data. I know for sure. And that's with all these projects and all these protocols, we're actually taking a step back, in my view. And we're going to have less capabilities. And I know we have Bitcoin, and that's fantastic. So we can always hear those cheers of you own your data. And my response is, okay, I own my data, but it's stored in 1,000 protocols, and I can't even use my data with itself.
But it's safe and secure.
It's like, but it's safe and secure. Yet I could go look. Here's the thing. This is kind of like it's like what's not being told. Your data that's put on the blockchain is wide open for the world to actually see, unless it's encoded. There's encoded use cases, so I'm not speaking of those. But on most use cases that involve data and hearts and likes and attributes and things like this, it's just put on the chain. So it's put on the chain, and the story should have been, we're going to put this on the chain, and everybody's going to be able to see it, but we're going to put it on the chain with intelligent design to begin with, pre-encoding at the storage step, so that you, the user, gain a tremendous advantage. And then, yes, you do own your data, and now it's valuable because it's usable. But if I can own my data and it's in 30,000 different places. I can't even find it. How's anybody else going to buy it?
You're touching on something very close to like my feelings and my sentiment on this space. So I'm going to throw you a question now. What do you think the ultimate design of Bitcoin is meant to be from what we've seen thus far of Dr. Craig Wright? I think it's very fair to say that it's an evolving process for him. And although he got an incredible amount that is insane from an engineering execution standpoint, what is achieved is, it's, in my opinion, it genuinely is Nobel Prize worthy, right? However, he's a man not perfect, and he's still evolving this system. And the fact that I think he finds it quite hard to articulate what the third layer is. And I also think he's also mentioned on the podcast that I had with him that he's doing a PhD in France in order to more adequately articulate the mathematics that's going on. What do you feel that the ultimate design of Bitcoin will be at scale? Because I don't think that the patient has left the surgeon's table yet in the story of Bitcoin. To me, the story of Bitcoin is still, you've got a patient attempting to be resuscitated by the surgeons, right? And every single time, you get like your I forget what it's called. I really need to get the name, but the device that they use to charge and electrically pump some voltage into the patient. That's the block reward. So every 10 minutes is boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
Right. And eventually till the patient takes its first breath, right? And breathes into life. And this is actually why I'm building Gravity, to help the patient take its first breath, because I believe what is required is micropayments, right? Once we can actually get oxygen delivered around the brain, then the brain's going to properly fire up, right? And we have all this hyperconnectivity, all these nodes communicating with each other. But ultimately, right now, we're flatlining and it's boom, boom. And we're slowly getting closer to building up more oxygen in the system, getting the blood flow going. But ultimately, we're definitely not even at the point where nutrients are flowing around the body yet to animate it.
Yeah, so it's not exactly the same, but I think it's touching on the same essence. So the A of and means awareness, and awareness are a type of edge. So all edges follow the same schema. You supply information for an edge the same way, so it doesn't break the protocol. But there are types. And one of the types is an awareness edge, which is a very important distinction, because you can have hierarchical edges. They build what like MetaNet would call a DAG, a graph, like you would represent a family tree or these rigid, these structures. But an awareness edge is completely different. It's the life. It's the heartbeat from you connecting into the graph, saying that you love this, you hate it, you despise it. It makes all the different types of emotions and opinions that you can link into these conceptual things that come from an identity, that come from something real that's using the system. So the key part about this, though, that touched on when you said micropayments, to do that in every awareness edge, you pay the miner the fee, but you also pay a micro transaction in the same transaction where you generate the edge, the op return, before you create it, and prepares the UTXO. So it's the perfect amount. So the change of that UTXO can be dumped and given to the owner or sponsor of the content that you're providing the feedback on. So now, for example, in the movie Mensa app, which is not released to the public still, but if I sponsor an actor or have control over the neuron, I helped get this neuron on chain, and now it's in this and brain, and you rate this actor, and it doesn't matter if you rate him positively or negatively. That little life edge goes, that awareness edge goes into the graph, connects you into that with a certain polarized feeling. And it also kicks back the payment to me because I sponsored that on the chain, or I'm the owner. And so this is a way that you can kind of give little mini charges that you're pointing on. It's not a block reward, but you could kind of, and I've noticed even in small testing, people have a lot to say. I don't have as much to say as others. I would say, I might have a couple of feelings to express about a topic. And I look at some of the data feedback. There's one person has 30 different feelings about one topic, because and that's great. And so this can kind of give those little jolts into the system. And this is another key part about the feedback loop is closed. So in the AI world, in the AGI world, they'll understand that concept a little bit more when I reference the feedback loop is closed by design. The moment you provide feedback on anything, the algorithms can instantly alter your experience on the app according to that feedback data. And here's another amazing point. If we're talking about using you could be on a different app, like on a ma and pa pie shop that is offering desserts, and provide feedback in that app, and that data point can instantly be used in another app, because it's feedback on your identity, and it's stored using one schema, like in the brain. Just like if you were to get, this happens to us all the time, and actually this is where your isomorphic patterns start to come into play, where you see something, you see a movie, you go have a conversation, you kind of have these different interactions, and then you get the real aha thought that was only possible because of seeing a pattern over here, different data points from disparate sources, different context. But that was possible because you're storing data in your brain and it has access to that full graph. Otherwise, if it was in those islands, sorry, I don't know you exist.
I've tried to ask you this. I've asked you this in a roundabout way 2 times already. I'm trying to swing back around and go in for like one last hook.
Yeah.
Give me the broader aspect. You're very interesting as a character. There's many things that you've said in this conversation that I very much agree with, and definitely we could have danced on some of the things that you said, just on their own, for like half-hour segments on some of the points. But it seems quite clear to me that somewhere on your journey, and I imagine it's still very much your journey, you seem to have a very holistic view.
Yes.
Right? And a very grounded and connected view. So like principles and practices, actually just how you look at things. Yes. And it seems clearly very nature and universally inspired. Someone who's recognized as being very similar in this space, right? It's how I've become known to be, right? And that's what people reference to me at. And I've tried to articulate and do my best to help people realize and understand that it can provide you a genuine edge, right? If we're talking about building really advanced technology, I really do think nature needs to continue and needs to be taken way more seriously as our inspiration. Where was your epiphany moment? Like, when did this awakening and this journey for you start influencing your technical decisions?
Well, the epiphany came before I was technical. So I like I mentioned before, I like technology, but before I was technical, I had a holistic approach. Before I was technical, I had interests in diving deep into many of the topics that you've touched on in some of your other with some of your other guests. And I imagine topics that you haven't mentioned, we probably share in common that you haven't yet brought up in any of your talks. So I had some influences in life as a youngin. My grandmother was a strong influence in some of those areas with various materials, which set me off on a path to consume and absorb and form my worldview, ever-changing worldview. But so that came before I actually had the technical chops per se in the coding game or in the software world.
It's very refreshing. It's very refreshing, brother. Honestly, okay. And you mentioned George earlier on in the conversation as well. It's definitely another brother and individual who very much has a very similar approach. And fortunately, I think it's becoming more of a common thing.
It's going to have to be. It's going to have to be because the left brain, right brain analogy is not exactly. It's not entirely accurate, but it still works for visual for communicating the meme of the story, where we get a lot of left brain skills in this industry, and those aren't necessarily going to get us to where we need to go if they're not balanced out with, we need a fullness. We need a full view. We don't need just solving. You could solve problems that don't need to be solved. And that's what's often, I use the word rube as a in short of a Rube Goldberg machine. You know, that those machines that take 28 steps to flip an egg. And so I point out, man, that's a genius Rube. You know, he really went the whole way. I've watched even videos. I'm like, that's a brilliantly amazing machine. But, you know, you could have done it in one
I think you
step.
could actually classify 99% of this space now. That's my new term, a Rube.
Really, that's what I didn't know if anyone understood what I was saying, but that's what I'm saying. I'm like, these are rubes. I mean, and with the wrong design in the data side, you can have people that are brilliant. You can have a lot of resources. You can have all the marketing and all the talk and go set out on your brave journey and build a rube, and then, not actually get to where you need to go. Because once you build your rube, those things aren't easy to change. You know, that machine requires 25 steps to work. And if you want to say, oh no, now I don't want the egg flipper, I also want the toast thing. Well, good luck. You know, so it's a setting out with the terra firma right. That's what Ann is truly about first. And that's what I learned at the AGI project that I worked on. Because there were design limitations that I inherited. I didn't start that project. They brought me in to pull it off because they couldn't solve it. And there were inherent flaws at the core level that are, but the design that project used is more advanced than any of these data storages used in Bitcoin. And this was in 2006. So in 2006, it's by far more advanced. What Ann was fixing the flaws in that system and moving it forward. So
something I would like to, we touched on it in different forms, but I just want to really touch on this and go into a little bit of detail before we round things up.
Mm-hmm.
Identity, right?
Yeah.
Identity on the internet.
Uh-huh.
And so we're speaking about here with data and the evolving of data and the connection of data and you being a source of data, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you see data on the internet? How do you see Ann's role in data on the internet? And again, I always try to put myself in the shoes of a non-technical individual, like trying to explain to my mum and dad, right?
Yeah.
In a sense of like, mum, dad, like this is why it's important. I can have a conversation with mum and dad right now as to what Facebook, Google, etc. are doing, and they completely get it. They understand that it's bad, right?
Yeah.
They get it. But in terms of pulling people away, even myself, it's hard to get pulled away from the system unless you do what you said you do, which is really limit your technical exposure to these devices, right? But that's very contradictory to ultimately the rest of the conversation we've been having, which is about data hyperconnectivity.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So on the subject of data and data on the internet, how do we reconnect with people at scale without all the insecurities that we should be having today, even more so than we actually do? Like, how do we maintain our humanity moving forward?
Right. So right now, they have our data, like you said, all the data on your Facebooks, your Googles, all these sites, and they have more than that. They have your browsing history. They've bought credit card purchase, reward purchases, married those joints together. So they even have more data than what we think our footprint is online. So they have it, and that's you're not going to take that from them. I'm saying you could stop giving it more of it to them. So what I would say is, first of all, identity is baked in, a core part of Ann. The identity neuron is what the user is. And those with identities can use the system, and they create state-based data that is live and changes over time. It's temporal. It comes through time. So identity is key, and you can't tackle identity as a one-off protocol and then try to marry it to different applications. You could try, but you're going to get a rube. Again, identity needs to be a part of the same lattice that all of the things identity will point to. So about that data you talked about, I want to be able to point to important things in my profile or my identity that, so let's distinguish. There's private data and there's public data. So on the public side, this is data that I know that anybody can see. And I'm going to link to these things. To do so, I need to get a payoff for this. And this was what I was touching on before. There's kind of been the chapter left out of, hey, you can own your own data. The chapter that's left out is your data is on chain for everybody to see. And for that to happen, you should get an immense payoff that brings you great new utility, that improves your life to the point that you can accept the fact that your data, there's some public data in the public space that is out there about you. Because once it's done and put out in that way, we can now have service companies that pop up that don't have to choose, I'm going to develop an app for Facebook because they have some data, or I'm going to develop app for MetaNet protocol because it has some data. They can choose to work on a single layer. You could have multiple companies popping up that fight to bring you the greatest new utility as the user that you could ever imagine, because that's how they win you over. They don't win you over by getting you to join their data prison and get on their custom protocol. You have a ubiquitous layer of data that you're storing that's married to your profile. And now these service companies can pop up and they can provide you artificial intelligence. They can provide you dating matches. They can provide you content recommendation. I have showed how to do some of that very easily in some of the application, some of the features of, for example, of Movie Mensa. I haven't released that app, but when I do, you can see how easy it is to do some of these things when data is stored in the way that I'm.
You've mentioned that app a couple of times. Do you have an ETA as to when you're going to be releasing that?
I mean, I don't have an ETA. I could release it next week if I wanted. At this point, I'm exploring getting some supporting structures in place, because from a technical standpoint, it's just me. For example, even while we're talking, I have to monitor all these services that are running in the background, just because.
That was going to be my last final question, which is, you've done incredible work, but have you been doing this solo? I mean, what's the next stages? Where do you take this?
Yeah, I'm entering in the next stage as we speak. It's why I've kind of come. I haven't shaved the caveman beard yet.
That's all right, mate. It's 2020. Yeah. I think that's the theme. I only shaved mine recently. You're right.
I could blame it. I can blame it on COVID, but it's actually because I was in the cave mode programming. But now it's a different chapter. The build out, the main build out is there. I have what I need to show from the services that I've built that follow some of the things that I've told you about. They operate at a service level. Anybody, any third party could create the same services I create. I have nothing special, using the same data that I'm using. And so I'm entering in a new phase for Anne, and I'm going to be looking to bring in interested parties from a resource standpoint, from a technical standpoint, even if that means a partnership deal where we jointly work on a project together. I don't really have anything. Do
you want to give anyone who's interested a way of contacting you?
Yeah, I definitely. Right now, I have some immediate people I'm discussing things with, and it's not just anybody that would interest me. So that's why I kind of want to check out where they're at. But really, I'm at the stage where I've done what I did in cave mode was efficient to do solo. And when I say solo, I had supporting folks. Wildcard's been a tremendous asset. Testers in my group, Rodan and
Wildcard is the one who's been interacting with me every now and again on Twitter, saying I need to check out Anne. So that's actually how I became aware.
Okay, she's one of the, if not the first, to interview Craig way back with her interview on camera. So there's been, Frank and Rodan and Rita, and there's been folks that have helped test and have been a tremendous help. And recently, Obi. Anyways, but the big part is I've been in cave mode programming because it's been efficient. Sometimes some of these ideas like this that I've carried for so long, and I had such a backlog of support in my mind, I can do things very efficiently, very rapidly. And it would actually be a detriment if I stopped to try to bring people on board before I did a certain level of build out. But now I've got the code base to where I need it. It still needs a lot of help. I'm from the private sector, not from open source. So it's a foreign concept to me, this idea people have of open source code. And so I definitely need to get some eyeballs into my world now, and now's the time to do it. So I'm looking at that. I've got some discussions ongoing, and I'm looking to kind of unfold the wings a little bit in that respect. I'm out of cave mode.
Well, my brother, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Really, really happy that you decided to reveal yourself to the world through our medium.
Okay.
Thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. There are many things that I wanted to say and where I wanted to take this conversation, but always try to use this medium as a way of communicating really complex ideas to an audience, which hopefully, if they've done it right, correctly, can digest them in a way that's not overly too technically burdensome. And also amazing having another brother out there who does look at the world holistically, who seems to be incentivized by the right things, who's fighting for connecting humanity by utilizing technology in order to maintain our humanity. Right?
That's right.
Which is not a thing that goes in the conversations around artificial intelligence, right? These things don't seem to go together. It always seem to be like oil and water. But genuinely, if we are going to stand any form of chance of competing, we need to be doing this. And projects like what you've described, what you've been working on, and now what you've actually built to the point which allows people to start playing around with, I believe are going to have a very, very important role to play in that. So my brother, I appreciate you. Thank you for your time. Is there anything that you would like to say in your final words?
No, I thank you for inviting me and for your time. And I just appreciate the opportunity to have our discussion. And anytime you can hit me up with questions, any of your listeners, if they have further questions, I would be happy to address them even on a one-on-one basis if they have.
I say we could treat this as like a tease, right? This is bringing you out into the open, allowing you to speak about Anne. And I would definitely love to do this again. And then we could dance in a little bit more detail.
We didn't even hit on Walter Russell or Rudolf Steiner or Alan Watts or any of these guys. I know you're
going to have me clearing my schedule now.
Yeah, I was saying none of it came up. So, but maybe next time.
I think we can actually, considering that's the background and the things it is that clearly we both read and stuff, I think we could take it as a victory that we didn't go down that route and we kept it. We kept it quite focused.
I did the best I could not to go unless it was going. So
next time, my brother.
All right,
Lukas. All the best. Yep. And again, thank you. And until the next time, peace, love, and light, everyone. All the best.
Yep. Many blessings. All right.